Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be talking with John Palmer today and have the City Biz audience learn about the important work this social entrepreneur does in the democracy reform movement. Uh, John has long been a leader in electoral reform, and he's an advocate of many reforms to improve and create healthy self governance in our country. He sits on the board of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, and he's currently chair of Rank the Vote, which is a strong advocate of ranked choice voting, an important democracy reform component of democracy reform, which we'll get into much later. John also supports many other organizations within the field. Welcome, John. So glad you gave us some of your time today to educate the City Biz interviews on so much that's going on, counter to the narrative we hear in the news every day. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David. Thanks so much for having me and for the generous introduction. I'm thrilled to be here and to tell my little piece of the story.
Okay, well, perhaps I'll start in that you and I have something in common. A lot of the folks I speak to are executive directors of NGOs or nonprofits, but you and I come from a business background and got involved in the field outside of our business efforts. I'm curious, how long ago did the democracy, the state of a democracy, start to concern you? How did you evolve from your full-time efforts with your company, Hanover, I think it's called Hanover Partners, if I'm not mistaken, and devote so much of your time to this important work? How did that metamorphosis happen?
No lie, David. And I was in first grade when the 1968, which is dating me to be my 62, almost 62 years old that I am. 1968, there was a presidential election, and my first grade teacher said, for your parents, there are two choices tomorrow. It was Humphrey and Nixon, and my hand shot up and said, I didn't know who George Wallace was, but I knew he was the third choice. And I clearly wouldn't have been a supporter if I'd known much about him. But I was sort of concerned about the only two choice thing, even as far back as first grade. Somewhere later, I learned that political parties aren't even mentioned in the Constitution, yet they seem to have their hands around all of our necks, just kind of a stranglehold on the system. And so I just, from early years, I was very interested in the two-party situation and saw it as a problem. And then not until many, many years later, decades later, when I had a little bit more time on my hands. So my day job was in investments. I'm in the private equity world, working with small businesses. It's been rewarding and in such a way that I feel like I can take the glide path a little bit early to doing something else. And this problem has always been with me, and in terms of feeling like the system is a problem and just finding a way to get involved and finding a way to, why do we only have two parties? How can we get beyond that? And that led me to some of the strong organizations in the nonpartisan reform space. Probably first off was ranked choice voting, but then some of the others that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Well, this will probably help a lot of other business leaders because I get this a lot that I don't have the time. Nothing's ever going to change. Why should I get involved? What would you say to a business leader that says, John, you're wasting your time? The Democrats and Republican Party are a duopoly. They've got all the money. You're just wasting your time, John. I get that all the time. I have my own standard answer, but I'm curious how you respond to that.
I would say I'm tickled with the progress that's been made in the, relative. I probably got involved reasonably seriously in around, 2010, 12, something like that. So I've been, a decade plus. But in that time, things like ranked choice voting are now the law of the land in two states. and many more jurisdictions than they were back then. And it's really become sort of a front and center conversation. I think we really are making progress. And if you look at other movements that make progress, whether it's women's suffrage or gay marriage, or pick your movement that reached a tipping point and then the dam broke. I'm hoping I got enough years left on this planet that this the dam might break while I'm still here. But I kind of want to be a part of something that's a little bigger than just the financial stuff that I've have done. And I think this is as good a cause as any, or a better cause than many.
Well, I totally agree with you. And maybe we should bring the City Biz audience up to speed a bit, because we've thrown out the term ranked choice voting a few times. Could you tell us a little about what that is and how that potentially could play into opening up the choices for voters beyond just a Democrat and Republican? How does ranked choice voting work?
Sure. Well, it's helpful to have a majority winner in elections. And if you have more than two people running for an election, the possibility is that the person with the most votes doesn't have a majority. And it makes it harder to vote for that third choice, because it's quite possible voting for that third choice would actually help the candidate that you like the least of the other two choices. So ranked choice voting says if nobody has a majority of the first choice votes cast, that they'll eliminate the person with the least votes, and the person that voted for that candidate will get their second choice. And you can start with more than three, and you just sort of iterate and keep eliminating the lowest vote getter until somebody has a majority. And sometimes that'll go all the way to the final round where there are just two, and sort of by definition somebody has to have a majority at that point. So what it enables is more than two candidates, the three or four candidates or five candidates, let's say, voters can vote much more sincerely for who they want without worrying that cast vote will help the person that they like the least. So it sort of enables you to vote that way, which enables independents or outside minor political parties to have more of a chance at your vote.
I understand. Well, that's very interesting. I know you're, and for full disclosure, I'm the co-founder of the Bridge Alliance, and the Bridge Alliance is on the board of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, and I know you're very involved with them, and you're on the board as well. Could you tell me a little about National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers? What's the purpose and the goal of having an organization that's an organization of lots of organizations? Could you give our audience some information on that?
I would say it is an umbrella organization, almost like a trade organization, but an umbrella organization for the larger nonpartisan reform organizations in the space, and some of the smaller ones as well. The ones that sit around the board table tend to be the larger ones, but we have members that are smaller organizations that have much more manageable dues levels. And it's a way to convene the organizations in the space to get together. They have a summit once a year where you can really get together and understand what other organizations are doing and what techniques they're using that might or might not be being successful for them. You could have, got ranked choice voting efforts going on in 30 or 40 states at this point. They all have organizations, and they can be members of what we call NANR that would then potentially come to the summit and learn from another state as to sort of what's being successful for them in their state when they're trying to promote ranked choice voting or open primaries or money in politics, getting money, reducing the effect of money in politics, whatever the policy issue is final five voting, etc. It's an opportunity to convene those members. We do convenings virtually, regular online meetings where people get a chance to talk to each other and other organizations. The summit, and there's talk of doing other on location type smaller events than a summit. But does that answer it for you?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. You mentioned something we've been talking about, ranked choice voting, but you mentioned money in politics, which is something when I talk to people, people on both the left and the right feel that that's a major problem. Are there any particular organizations you're involved with or work with or reforms related to that particularly resonate with you?
Yeah, well, the one who's at National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, NANR, that we talked about a second ago, who's prominently at that table, is American Promise. Jeff Clements is a good friend at this point and is just doing fantastic work. American Promise's mission is to pass a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, to give states the ability to regulate money in politics, because the Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United that they effectively don't have that right, that the Constitution really protects money as speech. And without a constitutional amendment, you really can't slow down the flow of money. American Promise is really all about, they're going state by state, and they've really made tremendous progress. They're a believer that, maybe money is speech, but there's kind of this bullhorn effect that when there's such gigantic amounts of money, that the smaller amounts of money are rendered sort of meaningless. Or the $10 that you and I could send in is dwarfed by the tens of millions of dollars that special interests can send in and effectively buy influence in Washington or at their state house.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm very familiar with Jeff Clements and the work he does, and passing an amendment in our country is a daunting task. But I have seen in the last 5 or 6 years he's definitely making progress. So I wish him the best. I have a question that reflects on something I'm going through presently. I wonder if you're going through it at all, or the organizations you advise and work with are going through it. The process we're going through is a long-term process. We're not going to fix this tomorrow. So most of us are long-term planners, whether it's a 3, 5, 10-year plan. But is there anything different in 2024 that you're doing, that you're thinking about, that you're working on related to the election coming up in November and what many people feel could be a transformative moment for our democracy? Are you just sort of letting that play out and continuing along your path, which is a solid step-by-step methodical method? Or are you focusing any of your efforts related to the upcoming events in November?
It's a super important election, and I don't want to take anything away from that. And I do have great emotion associated with the election. I won't go farther than that on my own personal preferences here, but what I would say is that there's plenty of people going after that issue. And I feel like the issue that we're talking about of, reforming the broken election system, getting rid of plurality outcomes and moving to something like ranked choice voting or proportional representation, which I'd love to talk about as well at some point. Those things require constant attention in the political cycle years and in the off years. And so I feel like there's not enough of us that are going after that stuff. We can't take our eye off of that ball for every time, every 2 years, there's an important election in Washington, right? And every 4 years, I guess it's a really important one. But there's a lot of people going after that, and there's so many fewer of us going after the reform thing. I urge my fellow reformers to not take our eye off of our ball, whatever our ball is, our reform issue that whatever our organizations are going after, to really keep after it.
Well, that's wise advice, and I certainly know firsthand, and there'll be future City Biz interviews on it. There are a lot of organizations working on the importance of election security, trust in elections, and that whole area. So it is wise that you keep your eye on your ball. You just mentioned something which was on my list, but I'll move it up. Proportional representation. What does that mean, and how is that different from how the present congressional system is set up?
Yeah, so proportional representation is a concept that's used around the world. Most of the Western market democracies in the world use some form of proportional representation. And what it means is that the parties get, if the Green Party, let's say, gets 15% of the votes in a given country, let's say, they're going to get 15% of the seats in that country's legislative body. Here, we have single member congressional districts where if you get 51%, you get your member, the person you voted for, goes to Congress, and the 49% get nothing. It's a winner take all situation. Now, overall in the U.S., it breaks down that we have two parties because, the Blues win some of the districts and the Reds win some of the districts. But if you're a Republican in San Francisco, you haven't had representation in the state house in California or in Washington for decades. The way proportional representation might work is you might have a 5-member district that includes San Francisco and some surrounding counties. And you say, if the Republicans get more than 25% of the vote, they're going to send a member to Sacramento or to Washington, depending, we're talking about proportional representation at the state level or the federal level. It's that type of approach. And it typically evolves to a multi-party system. And I'm a believer that, that we need more competition in our system than the two-party system is allowing us, and that a multi-party system would create greater accountability for the two large parties. If there was an alternative that was right next to the Democratic Party, maybe it's the Bernie Sanders party, or maybe it's some sort of left center Democrat type party to be named later, but it gives more of a competitive arena. So and one thing I would say is, ranked choice voting has come a long way, and it's now more of a regular conversation topic of, should a certain jurisdiction adopt that, or Final Five voting, which I can give a shout out to that in a minute if there's time. But proportional representation was nowhere, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I think proportional representation now is where ranked choice voting was a decade ago. It's getting more attention. It's potentially more achievable. It deserves more. It deserves the attention and some dollars to explore it, because I think it's an avenue that certain states or municipalities, you look at like a town council or city council or something, can use a proportional form of representation as well. So let me stop there and see if that.
Yeah, let me ask you a question specifically about it. So you could have proportional representation. It could be passed by a municipality. It could be statewide, but it could also potentially be national on a congressional level. On the congressional level, would that require legislation by Congress, or would that require an amendment?
Yeah, so there's a bill, actually, legislative. It can be passed by a law, not a constitutional amendment, to my understanding. There's a bill in Congress currently that's been reintroduced. It's called the Fair Representation Act. It would do what I said a minute ago, where you actually have multi-member districts um, uh, across the entire country. To the smaller states, they're going to be smaller. I think they would keep it to within a state's borders, so it might be a small number of seats for the smaller states. But for a state like California, you might go with 6-member districts, and I think we've got 55 seats overall. So you'd have whatever it is, 9 districts or something like that, of 6 members each elected proportionally. So that San Francisco Republican is going to get their representation in Washington in that example.
You've met so many of the leaders in the field that we know so much about. Are there any experiences or stories that you have about any of them, how they've helped you, impacted you, given you guidance, and any in particular that you care to call attention to, who you have been, feel like you have been one of the great change leaders, have been great reformers over the years?
Well, I don't hold a candle to. I mean, I've dedicated a bunch of time to it, but people like Rob Ritchie, who I think he founded Fairvote in 1992. He's really devoted the lion's share of his professional career to this. My hat's off to Rob and people like him. Newcomers in the space, RepresentUS, the Josh Graham-Lim and Josh Silver, both have really founded quite an organization there. Nick Troiano, whose new book I just finished reading, The Primary Solution, what a fantastic leader he has been. And he has brought tremendous amount of donor money to the space, and which is just so, it's been transformative. And so my hat's off to Nick and all the people he's working with. Somebody like Nathan Lockwood, who's our executive director at Rank the Vote, has, stepped up in that organization. And we've gone from almost a nothing budget to a multi-million-dollar budget in just a handful of years. So it's those types of people that are just doing so much more than I am, they're all inspirational. The people that made ranked choice voting happen in Maine, on the ground in Maine, Kyle Bailey was a campaign manager there. He was phenomenal. And just my hat's off to all of these people.
Well, maybe this is a good way to end, because hopefully thousands of other business leaders who are regular listeners on City Biz will be inspired and feel that the work you're doing is not a fantasy, that this is a real narrative, and they can make a difference. What are the steps they should do as someone who cares but knows really relatively nothing? What would you suggest? How would they step into this?
These things don't happen with people sitting on the sidelines. And, if you're frustrated with the system, rather than shouting at your TV set, devote your time to something that you care about. And I'd love to see more people get involved, channel your energy towards a solution. And, we've made a lot of progress in this space. It is slow going, but it's, there are victories that sort of, take leaps forward. And, at some point the dam may break in our favor. One thing I wanted to, if I'm just going to keep going with my final thought, which is, the intersection of what's possible in terms of reform. One of the reforms I didn't talk about is Final Five or Top Four, where you use a nonpartisan primary to advance the top 4 or top 5 vote getters in the primary, all candidates on the same ballot, all voters able to vote. You advance those 4 or 5, and then in the November general election, you use ranked choice voting to sort out that 4 or 5. That is a reform that can happen now. And there are 4 or 5 states that are seriously looking at implementing it, on the heels of Alaska, who has already implemented it. It is a fantastic reform that Nick Troiano talks a lot about in his book. Right behind that is proportional representation, in my mind, in that's the next wave of reform that will happen. And that may be a decade away in terms of really happening at the scale that, top 4 or Final Five or ranked choice voting is happening. But it'll be there. And it's an exciting time in our space. We need more people. We need more donations. et cetera, et cetera. And so I hope some of you listening will look into some of the organizations we've talked about today, or contact David if you need more of a lead on that. But anyways, been my pleasure to be here and tell my little piece of the story.
Well, it's a big piece of the story, John, and hopefully you'll inspire others to realize that democracy is not a spectator sport, and that if we have 1,000 or 2,000 John Palmers out there, we can make real change. So thank you so much for your time. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you for all you're doing in the space and have done with the Fulcrum and all the eyeballs that you're attracting there.
Okay, thank you very much.